Good evening, Fräulein Maria.
9 of them gone. One woke from a routine surgery and never sang another note in her life. One played a father on screen while his teenage co-star secretly burned with a forbidden crush. A crush she carried until dementia stole her mind. One nearly drowned on camera at 6 years old. One was Hollywood's most famous secret voice and died unknown to the millions who loved her. And the man who became Captain Von Trapp hated this film so much he called it the sound of mucus until the day he died. Stay with me. The truth is darker than the movie ever showed. Julie Andrews as Maria, the voice, the smile, the 4-octave miracle who taught the world how to sing about its favorite things. And in 1997, a single doctor took it all away in one morning. Julie Andrews was born Julia Elizabeth Wells in Walton-on-Thames, England on October 1st, 1935, a child prodigy with perfect pitch who was singing for King George VI by age 13. After conquering Broadway in The Boyfriend and My Fair Lady, she crossed to Hollywood and won the Best Actress Oscar for Mary Poppins on her very first film. 1 year later, she became Maria Von Trapp, and stardom was no longer a dream, it was an inheritance.
I could never answer to a whistle. Whistles are for dogs and cats and other animals, but not for children, and definitely not for me.
But here is where the story turns dark. In June 1997, Julie walked into Mount Sinai Hospital in New York for what doctors told her was a routine procedure to remove a small, non-cancerous cyst on her vocal cords. She thought she would be back on Broadway in 2 weeks. Instead, she woke up and her singing voice was gone forever. Scar tissue, permanent damage, the 4-octave instrument that had defined musical cinema destroyed in a single morning. Julie has compared the new sound of her voice to chalk dragged across a blackboard, and she fell into a depression so deep she felt her entire identity had been erased along with the singing. In December 1999, she filed a malpractice lawsuit against the hospital, which was settled quietly out of court, and she attended grief counseling in Arizona to cope with the loss. And then she did the impossible. She rebuilt herself. She wrote over 30 children's books with her daughter Emma, voiced Queen Lillian in Shrek, and narrated Bridgerton.
Is it a soundstage? Is this real?
Are you kidding? That's the real thing.
As of 2026, Dame Julie Andrews is 90 years old, still working, still smiling, still climbing every mountain. Let me know, does her story break your heart the way it breaks mine? Christopher Plummer as Captain Georg von Trapp. He was the face of the film, the strict father who learned to love again, and he secretly despised every single second of it.
Fräulein will listen carefully, learn their signals so that you can call them when you want them.
Lisa! Friedrich!
Arthur Christopher Orm Plummer was born in Toronto on December 13, 1929, the great-grandson of a Canadian Prime Minister, and trained as a pianist before falling into Shakespearean theater. By the early 1960s, critics were already calling him one of the greatest classical actors of his generation, and he only took the role of Captain Von Trapp at age 35 because he thought it would be useful training for a future production of Cyrano de Bergerac. What he got instead was a lifetime sentence. Plummer notoriously nicknamed the film The Sound of Mucus, and other times simply called it S&M.
What's going to happen is going to happen. Just make sure it doesn't happen to you.
Max, don't you ever say that again.
He told reporters the movie was sentimental and gooey and compared playing the captain to flogging a dead horse. He even joked that he ate so many Austrian pastries during the shoot that wardrobe had to resize his entire costume just to keep filming. But the real darkness was off camera because Plummer fought a vicious, decades-long battle with alcohol abuse. By his own later admission, he had become angry, unpleasant, and headed for ruin until he met his third wife, Elaine, in the late 1960s, a woman his biographers credit with literally pulling him back from the edge. The drinking stopped, the career bloomed, and in his 80s came the redemption. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in Beginners at age 82, making him the oldest acting Oscar winner in history. He kept working in All the Money in the World and Knives Out, and after watching the film privately one Easter Sunday decades after filming, he reportedly admitted he had been wrong all along, that it was a beautiful, timeless picture, and he was proud of his part in it. On February 5th, 2021, Christopher Plummer suffered a fall at his home in Weston, Connecticut, and died from a head injury at the age of 91. Did you know he hated this film for so long? Eleanor Parker as Baroness Elsa Schrader. She was the icy, elegant rival who almost married the captain.
Oh, he's no ordinary man.
Oh, he's rich.
When his wife died, she left him with a terrible heartache.
3 Oscar nominations, The Woman of 1,000 Faces, and by 1965, the system that built her was already burying her alive. Eleanor Jean Parker was born in Cedarville, Ohio on June 26, 1922, and was discovered at the Pasadena Playhouse before signing with Warner Brothers at 19. Through the 1940s and 50s, she became Hollywood's most adaptable leading lady, earning 3 Best Actress Oscar nominations in just 5 years for Caged, Detective Story, and Interrupted Melody, and winning the Volpe Cup at the Venice Film Festival. She co-starred with Bogart, Sinatra, Heston, Kirk Douglas, and Clark Gable. She was the woman of her generation. But by the early 1960s, her star was falling, the studio system was dying, and roles for women in their 40s were vanishing. The Baroness in The Sound of Music became quietly her last memorable big screen part. She married 4 times, a Navy dentist, a film producer, a portrait painter, and finally a Broadway theater executive named Raymond Hirsch, the only marriage that truly lasted, ending only when he died in 2001. Christopher Plummer himself spoke publicly of her with deep affection after her death, calling her one of the most beautiful and dignified women he had ever known. On December 9, 2013, Eleanor Parker passed away from complications of pneumonia at a medical facility near her home in Palm Springs, California, at the age of 91. The Woman of 1,000 Faces was finally still. Peggy Wood as Mother Abbess. She sang Climb Every Mountain in one of the most iconic moments in movie history. And here is the secret the studio buried for 60 years. The voice you hear isn't actually hers. Mary Margaret Peggy Wood was born in Brooklyn on February 9, 1892, and by the time The Sound of Music came around, she had already lived 3 lifetimes. She was a Broadway leading lady from the 1910s onward, collaborating with Noel Coward and Jerome Kern, and had spent 7 full seasons as the matriarch on the early television classic Mama. But she was also 73 years old, and her singing voice could no longer hit the soaring climb that the role demanded. So the studio quietly hired soprano Marjorie McKay to dub the high notes. Peggy provided the face, the gravity, the towering moral presence. But the voice that taught a generation to climb every mountain was in part never even hers.
How do you solve a problem like Maria?
The performance was still so powerful that she earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, and Norway awarded her the St. Olav's Medal for her cultural contributions. On March 18, 1978, Peggy Wood suffered a stroke and passed away in Stamford, Connecticut at the age of 86. Did you know she didn't sing her own song? Charmian Carr as Liesl von Trapp. A Girl in the Gazebo, the teenager twirling in chiffon, 16 going on 17, and behind that smile was a secret she carried for the rest of her life, and an ending almost too cruel to write down. Charmian Ann Farnan was born in Chicago on December 27, 1942, the daughter of a vaudeville actress and an orchestra leader, and she was actually 21 years old when she sang the song The World Will Never Forget. Director Robert Wise thought Farnan was too long a surname and asked her to pick a new one from a list, so she chose Carr. In her memoir, Forever Liesl, Charmian finally admitted what the cast had whispered for years. She had developed a real aching crush on Christopher Plummer, the man playing her on-screen father. During the famous gazebo dance, she crashed straight through a glass pane, sliced her leg open, and finished the take with her wound hidden under makeup. The scene you remember from your childhood was filmed on a bleeding leg. After the film, Carr essentially walked away from Hollywood, married a dentist, raised 2 daughters, and quietly built a wildly successful interior design firm whose most famous and loyal client was Michael Jackson himself, a devoted Sound of Music fan. But the universe was not finished with her, because Carr was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, a rare and merciless disease that slowly erases language, personality, and self. On September 17, 2016, she passed away in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles, at the age of 73. She was the very first of the 7 Von Trapp children to be lost, and the family circle had been broken forever. Angela Cartwright as Brigitte Von Trapp, the bookish one, the observant one, the daughter who looked Maria in the eye and told her plainly that she was the prettiest woman she had ever seen. Angela Margaret Cartwright was born in Cheshire, England on September 9, 1952, and she was already a child acting veteran by the time The Sound of Music found her.
I'm 10, And I think your dress is the ugliest one I ever saw. Brigitte, you shouldn't say that.
She had played Linda Williams on The Danny Thomas Show for 7 full seasons, and right after the Von Trapps, she became a sci-fi icon as Penny Robinson on Lost in Space. Few child actors transitioned that smoothly, and even fewer survived Hollywood with their souls intact. But Angela did. She built a second life as a visual artist, photographer, and author, running her brand Angela Cartwright Studio and co-authoring Styling the Stars and the Sound of Music Family Scrapbook. She has been married to Steve Gullion since 1976, almost 50 years, has 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and a piece most child stars never find. As of 2026, she is 73 years old and still creating every single day. Which Von Trapp child was your favorite? Kim Karath as Gretel Von Trapp. The youngest, the tiniest, the one who stole every scene by simply existing, and the one who almost died on camera. Kim Karath was born in Los Angeles on August 4th, 1958 to Greek immigrant parents, and she was just 6 years old when she walked onto the Sound of Music set. During the famous boat scene, when the children tip into the lake to greet their father, little Kim went straight under the water because she could not swim. Charmian Carr was supposed to catch her, but missed. Kim swallowed lake water, choked, and had to be pulled out by crew, and the trauma stayed with her for years. After the film, she kept working in television on Family Affair, The Brady Bunch, and The Waltons, then studied humanities at USC, lived in Paris, married Frenchman Philippe Equebec, and raised a son before the marriage ended in 2005. She has stayed close to her on-screen siblings for 6 full decades, often referring to them as her brothers and sisters, and she is the one who tweets the eulogies whenever another Von Trapp falls. As of 2026, she is 67 years old, still living in Los Angeles, still showing up for every reunion. The little girl who almost drowned grew into the heart of the family. Duane Chase as Kurt Von Trapp. The mischievous 4th child who proudly told his governess he was incorrigible, and then did the most shocking thing any 1960s child star ever did, walking away from Hollywood completely and never looking back. Duane Dudley Chase was born in Los Angeles on December 12, 1950. After The Sound of Music, he made one more credited screen appearance, a guest spot on the western The Big Valley in 1966, and then disappeared from movie sets entirely. He went back to school, earned a bachelor's in geology from UC Santa Barbara and a master's from the University of Alabama, worked for the U.S. Forest Service, and became a software analyst designing tools for the oil and mining industries before settling in Seattle and taking up mountaineering. He married Petra Maria Sanderson, a German-born nurse, in 1988, and they are still together. As of 2026, Duane Chase is 75 years old, almost completely off the public radar, exactly how he wants it. Would you ever walk away from fame the way Duane did? Marni Nixon as Sister Sophia. She was the smiling nun in the chorus, and almost no one in 1965 knew that Marni Nixon was already the most famous voice in Hollywood that nobody had ever heard of. Margaret Nixon McEachran was born in Altadena, California on February 22, 1930 with rare and absolute perfect pitch, and for 2 decades she was the secret behind Hollywood's biggest movie musicals. She was the actual singing voice of Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, Natalie Wood in West Side Story, and Deborah Kerr in The King and I. And she even sang the high notes for Marilyn Monroe in the legendary Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. And the studios threatened her. 20th Century Fox warned she would never work in this town again if she ever told the truth. She signed contracts of silence, watched other women win awards for her voice, and received almost no credit and almost no money. The Sound of Music was her one moment in front of the camera, her one chance for the world to finally see the woman whose voice they had been loving for 15 years. She survived breast cancer in 1985 and again in 2000, but the 3rd time the disease did not let go. On July 24, 2016, Marni Nixon passed away from breast cancer in New York City at the age of 86. The greatest voice you never knew was finally silent. How does Hollywood let this happen to a woman so talented? Richard Hayden as Max Detweiler, the witty, scheming music promoter who delivered the film's funniest lines and off-camera, almost the opposite of his character. George Richard Hayden was born in Camberwell, London on March 10, 1905, and before he was an actor, he was a ticket seller and briefly an overseer on a banana plantation in Jamaica. He invented a fussy, nasal radio character named Edwin Carp that made him a star in 1930s London, then crossed to Hollywood and built a long career as the go go-to actor for pompous and absent-minded gentleman, voicing the caterpillar in Disney's Alice in Wonderland, directing 3 Paramount features, and even working with Mel Brooks in Young Frankenstein. But Richard Haydn never married, never had children, and gave very few interviews. He spent most of his free time gardening in private and avoiding the spotlight that made him famous, and some who knew him described him as a quietly melancholy man, the comic mask slipping when nobody was looking. On April 25, 1985, Richard Haydn passed away from a heart attack in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles at the age of 80. The funniest man in the Von Trapp household died alone. Norma Varden as Frau Schmidt, the warm-hearted housekeeper who handed Maria the famous bolt of curtain fabric, a small role in a giant film, and a life behind it longer and stranger than the part suggests. Norma Varden Shackleton was born in London on January 20th, 1898. Yes, the 19th century. She trained as a concert pianist before turning to the stage, and by the 1930s she was a fixture in British comedies. Hitchcock fans will recognize her as the elegant woman Bruno nearly strangles during the party scene in Strangers on a Train, and she also appeared in Casablanca, Witness for the Prosecution, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and over 100 other films and television shows. She never married and had no children. She quietly cared for her elderly mother and only retired from acting after her mother's death in 1969. Then spent her final 2 decades living with calm dignity in Santa Barbara, California. On January 19, 1989, exactly 1 day before her 91st birthday, Norma Varden passed away from heart failure. A century of life missed by 24 hours. Anna Lee as Sister Margareta, the kind, sympathetic nun who sabotaged the Nazi Carr so the Von Trapps could escape, and one of the most extraordinary survivors in Hollywood history. Joan Boniface Winifred was born in Idem, Kent on January 2, 1913, the daughter of an Anglican rector, and her godfather was none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. She trained at the Royal Albert Hall, became a leading lady in 1930s British cinema, and after moving to Hollywood, she became a regular in John Ford's stock company, appearing in 7 of his pictures over 25 years. During World War II, she volunteered for USO duty, entertained Allied troops in North Africa and the Persian Gulf with Jack Benny, and was made an honorary private in the 6th Army by General George Patton himself. In 1978, at age 65, she joined General Hospital as the matriarch Lila Quartermain. Then the universe took a swing at her. In 1981, just 1 year into the role, a horrific car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Most actresses would have ended their careers right there, but Anna Lee did not. She kept playing Lila from a wheelchair for the next 23 years. Queen Elizabeth honored her with the MBE, and Hollywood gave her a star on the Walk of Fame. But the cruelest blow came at the very end, when in 2003, the new producers of General Hospital fired her after 25 years in the role. Her son said publicly that the dismissal broke her heart, and her health collapsed within months. On May 14, 2004, Anna Lee passed away from pneumonia in Beverly Hills, California at the age of 91. 1 week later, she was posthumously awarded the Daytime Emmy Lifetime Achievement Award, and her son accepted it for her. Portia Nelson as Sister Berth, the strict nun, the skeptical one, but Portia Nelson lived an artistic life so rich and so secret that almost no Sound of Music fan knows the half of it. She was born Betty Mae Nelson in tiny Brigham City, Utah on May 27, 1920, the youngest of 9 children, 4 of whom had died before she was even born. She grew up on a family farm, taught herself piano, and took her stage name from a 1940s radio soap opera. By her 20s, she was a discovery of CBS Records and one of the most celebrated cabaret singers in New York City, headlining the legendary Blue Angel, the Bonsoir, and Cafe Society. She wrote songs recorded by Tony Bennett, Marilyn Horne, Doris Day, and Barbara Cook. And her composition Make a Rainbow was sung by Marilyn Horne at President Bill Clinton's 1993 inaugural ceremony. She also authored the famous self-help poem Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters, which became a foundational text in 12-step recovery programs and is still quoted in therapy offices around the world. She battled cancer through the late 1970s, recovered, and kept performing for decades. But the disease eventually came back. On March 6, 2001, Portia Nelson passed away in her Manhattan apartment at the age of 80, and per her own wishes, her ashes were scattered by friends and family in the Kolob Canyons of Zion National Park, one of her favorite childhood places in Utah. Debbie Turner as Marta Von Trapp. The little one with the missing teeth, the daughter who wanted a pink parasol for her birthday, and the one who quietly built the most beautiful life of all the surviving children. Debbie Turner was born in Arcadia, California on September 5th, 1956, had been appearing in television commercials practically since infancy, and was just 7 years old when she joined Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer on the Von Trapp set. After the film, the work she expected never came. Hollywood is cruel to child stars who grow up. So Debbie made one more film, North Dallas 40 in 1979, and then walked away for good. She moved to Minnesota, married Rick Larson in 1980, and had 4 daughters and 10 grandchildren. She built a wildly successful business called Debbie Turner Originals, designing wedding florals and event decor, and her work was so respected that she has been invited multiple times to help decorate the White House for Christmas. As of 2026, Debbie Turner is 69 years old, healthy, happy, and surrounded by family. Proof that the happiest endings are often the quietest ones. So this is the Sound of Music cast, then and now. Lost voices, hidden crushes, brain disease, botched surgeries, ghost singers who died unknown, and a captain who hated the film that made him famous. Where they are in 2026 is a question that gets harder to answer every year. Which of these tragedies broke your heart the most? Comment below. I read every single one. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Until next time, my friend, keep the hills alive.